You were anxious to go.
We were anxious to go. Everything was all ready to roll. Everybody really anticipated victory naturally, and not knowing, what lied ahead, but they just wanted to go. First off, you get disgusted aboard ship anyway, and you want to go on land, and not only that, as you're riding around, you just don't come off the nets and go into the ship and then go right into the beach. You got to get into that LCVP, and then you get into a pattern until the rest of the ship is unloaded. So you're out there circling for 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. And mind you, you got a jacket on, it stinks, a K-pop jacket, it's supposed to be your lifesaver. We had no vest, bulletproof vest then in the 50s. And your equipment, you're loaded for bear because you don't know how long it'll be before they bring you any, rations or anything else, ammunition. So you're really loaded, and you're riding around in the choppy seas there, waiting until everybody's unloaded, and then they give the word, hit the beach, and then they peel off and start making it for the beach. And at Inchon, because of the seawall, we had ladders. It wasn't a landing like in some of the World War II landings where it was a sandy beach, naturally with the enemy shooting. So we didn't get too much of light. When we were coming in close, we had a couple of rounds, then you knew it was for real. But we were lucky. We didn't lose nobody coming in.
Now, this was your actual first taste of combat.
Yes.
Can you sort of tell us a little bit how you felt personally about this? In other words, what were your feelings about it?
I felt good. I was just saying, hopefully that they tell you in training that the round that goes off you don't hear is the one that gets you. So you're anticipating that, but you're definitely, wide awake naturally, and you're just looking for the enemy.
And that feeling was shared among your fellow.
I would venture to say the whole group, sure.
They were up for this.
Everybody was up.
Reveille was played over the ship's loudspeaker systems at 3 a.m. Most Marines were already wide awake. For some, breakfast consisted of powdered eggs, toast with no butter, and canned apricots. Most were too nervous to eat. The first streaks of dawn broke pink over the massed armada that was Joint Task Force 7. That's when the shooting started. The serene Asian calm exploded in an apocalyptic barrage of rockets, bombs, and napalm, heralding the first major amphibious assault by Americans since Okinawa on 1 April 1945. This was the assault of Wolmi-do. Inchon would come that afternoon. Private First Class Doug Koch and other members of D Company 5th Marines watched from USS Cavalier. Everybody felt this was going to be the indicator. If Wolmi-do fell easily, it probably meant we would not have too tough a go on Red Beach. About 10 o'clock, the ship announced resistance was moderate and, best of all, losses were light. This news was greeted by a very loud cheer.
The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, had the initial assault during the Inchon landing, and that was my photo assignment. They were to capture the strongly manned, heavily fortified island of Wolmi-do in Inchon Harbor and hold it at all costs throughout the day. It was a tricky mission, for the extreme tides meant that the Marines, once ashore, could not be reinforced until the next high tide that evening, when the full-scale invasion of the mainland would occur. At dawn on September 15, 1950, following a heavy sea and air bombardment, the Marines struck the island and quickly had the situation well in hand. The now combat-hardened Yellowlegs stormed the defenders, devastating them on hillsides and routing them from bunkers with such elan and efficiency that General Douglas MacArthur, watching from his flagship, hailed the landing as one of the Corps' finest hours. As for my secondary military occupational specialty, now called photojournalism, I practiced the lessons from our days in the Pusan Perimeter. Surprisingly, war is difficult to photograph, not because of the peril, but because even the deadliest of firefights could look tame on film as peacetime maneuvers. The key to capturing warfare, I had learned, was to freeze in time those moments that graphically declared that this was war, without question, from infantry passing burning buildings to taking prisoners. Time and tide wait for no man, it said, so the Marines on Wolmi-do could only wait for both. Guarding a long causeway that spanned the harbor to Inchon proper, they settled down to day-long vigilance until the greatest show on earth that evening. The pre-invasion bombardment of the mainland was so spectacular that we kidded that we could make fortunes if we could peddle grandstand seats for the fireworks. But the banter died, and lumps of raw emotion caught in our throats as we watched the first waves of our fellow Marines head so vulnerably and bravely toward the seawalls and beaches. The sight of other Marines at risk evokes unforgettable, incredibly powerful feelings of unabashed pride and concern, and yes, prayer. Quite simply, it's brotherhood, as blood binding as family. Napoleon had a word for it. "I may lose battles," he once remarked, "but I do not lose minutes." This might well have been the motto of the Marine Engineers and Shore Party at Inchon, for there were no minutes to spare when the 1st Marine Division hit the beaches on 15 September 1950 as the landing force of 10 Corps. The planners had deemed it necessary to take several calculated risks, and they put it up to the Engineers and Shore Party to win a critical race against time and tide in the rain-swept darkness of D-Day. The 1st Engineer Battalion was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John H. Partridge, and the 1st Shore Party Battalion by Lieutenant Colonel Henry P. Crow. Each unit had been represented by a company in the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, so that neither battalions was complete until the remaining elements arrived for the Inchon landing. A good deal of field experience had been acquired by the men who served in the brigade, and the others had received shipboard instruction as well as some practical training at Kobe. Progress might have been most costly, however, if a squad of engineers had not been on hand to remove some 300 Russian anti-personnel bombs. The shore party was represented by a team that unloaded LSTs, assisted by the engineers as more of their units landed. Offshore mudflats prevented the solid breaching of these craft, so that corduroy roads had to be hastily built onto the ramps. Enemy small arms fire interfered at times, but the engineers took a few prisoners without incurring any casualties of their own. During the next several hours, the engineers and shore party elements swarmed over the battered island, transforming it into an advanced base for the assault on Inchon. The 1,000-foot concrete causeway leading from Wolmi-do to the mainland was scanned for mines, then repaired so that Marine tanks could cross. A good day's work had already been accomplished before 1730, when the landing boats churned the water as naval gunfire and rockets made the Inchon target area heave with explosions.
The bombing and airstrikes on Inchon and Wolmi-do continued all day. The drone of propellers from carrier-based Vought F-4U Corsairs of Marine Fighter Squadron 323, Death Rattlers, and VMF 214 Black Sheep signaled support from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing. Sorties flown by these squadrons and the Navy, coupled with 2,845 shells of naval gunfire from warships, so dangerously close to running aground their crews were prepared to repel boarders, caused the entire beach area of Inchon to disappear in an enormous cloud of dust and smoke, with only the occasional glare of a rocket burst, said Second Lieutenant Frank Moitzel of A Company in USS Henrico. It was awesome. It was heady stuff, to be sure, that got Moitzel's antenna quivering, a feeling not uncommon when live ammunition is used and rounds go downrange. PFC Koch nervously checked his equipment several times over and went over the side, down cargo nets to the landing craft bouncing in the waves. At 5:39 p.m., waves of assault vehicles came abreast and churned toward Inchon, disappearing in clouds of ugly smoke that hid the city. Red Beach was getting closer, said Koch. It made me feel very small and insignificant. The noise got louder, and we began to take small arms fire. Vehicles hit the seawall, dropped their ramps as far as possible, and scaling ladders were thrown into place. Marines flung a barrage of grenades over the wall. At the first sound of explosions, they started up the ladders. Second Lieutenant Tom Gibson of Mortar Company told a fellow Marine, First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez, a graduate of the Naval Academy and a World War II veteran, there is this famous photograph of Marines landing on Red Beach. It shows a lot of Marines waiting to climb over the seawall. One Marine, however, is already on a ladder, his right leg on the seawall. That Marine was Punchy Lopez.
For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as a rifle platoon commander of Company A, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division Reinforced, in action against enemy aggressor forces during the Inchon invasion in Korea on 15 September 1950. With his platoon, 1st Lieutenant Lopez was engaged in the reduction of immediate beach defenses after landing with the assault waves. Exposing himself to hostile fire, he moved forward along inside a bunker and prepared to throw a hand grenade into the next pillbox whose fire was pinning down that sector of the beach. Taken under fire by an enemy automatic weapon and hit in the right shoulder and chest as he lifted his arm to throw, he fell backward and dropped the deadly missile. After a moment, he turned and dragged his body forward in an effort to retrieve the grenade and throw it. In critical condition from pain and loss of blood, and unable to grasp the hand grenade firmly enough to hurl it, he chose to sacrifice himself rather than endanger the lives of his men, and with a sweeping motion of his wounded right arm, cradled the grenade under him and absorbed the full impact of the explosion. His exceptional courage, fortitude, and devotion to duty reflect the highest credit upon 1st Lieutenant Lopez and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country.
There was no time to waste. It was getting dark and the tide was ebbing. Amid heavy small arms and mortar fire, Marines jumped on the ladders so forcefully that many snapped under their weight, but they poured over the top of the seawall. Sergeant Charles Allen of A Company scaled the wall under heavy fire from his flank and front. Several Marines were cut down right behind him. Moitzel's platoon broke through a gap in the seawall, jumped into a trench, and threw grenades at a pillbox, causing 6 bloody North Koreans to surrender. 8 Marines died in the first 10 minutes of the assault. However, the rest continued to push their way into Inchon's high ground called Cemetery Hill and seized the British consulate while moving on towards Observatory Hill. At Blue Beach, nearly 3 miles southeast, Able, Dog, Charlie, and Baker companies of the 1st Marines attempted to flank the North Korean garrison and cut off any possible retreat. It had begun to rain, and in the fading light there was great and deadly confusion. Landing ship tanks, moving toward the beach to discharge their cargo, opened up with 20 and 40 millimeter guns, spraying Marine units on the advance. Demolitions set by shore party members to clear holes in the seawall blew in the midst of the Marines. The Navy fired 6,000 rockets in 20 minutes into the city. The barrage totally demolished the Asahi Brewery, much to the chagrin of Marines who'd been promised a beer bust to end all beer busts if the brewery was taken intact. Not a bottle was left unbroken. Many would never forgive the Navy for this atrocity. The naval and air support, however, took its toll on members of the North Korean People's Army's 226th Regiment, who started surrendering in numbers. Marines with flamethrowers and 3.5-inch rocket launchers flushed the rest. It had a price. By day's end, 20 Marines had been killed and 187 wounded. Enemy casualties for 2 days would total 300 killed in action and 1,350 wounded. In 8 hours, 13,000 Marines and all their equipment were ashore. MacArthur had been at his tactical best.